All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're unpacking what's basically a new rulebook for how businesses operate. We're going to use the ESG Excellence Program from Bart C's group as our map to get through the pretty demanding and now very much mandatory world of environmental, social, and governance.
You know, ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance. It's completely shifted. It's moved from being a side project to being front and center in the boardroom. This isn't just about ticking boxes for compliance anymore. It's about creating a real competitive advantage. So, the framework we're looking at today, it's all about building two things. First, the technical know-how to actually measure your impact, and second, the strategic vision to turn all that data into real value.
So here's our game plan. We've got it broken down into 4 parts. First, we're going to hit the big why. Why has ESG all of a sudden become mandatory? Then, we'll open up the toolbox and see how you measure this stuff. After that, we'll connect the data to strategy, and finally, we'll get into the fine art of reporting what actually matters.
Okay, let's kick things off with the big shift. For what feels like forever, ESG was all about, voluntary reports and good PR. Well, that era is officially over. We're in a whole new ballgame now, an age of mandatory, audited disclosures where the stakes are just as high as they are with financial reporting.
So the new gold standard is the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD. It is incredibly demanding. We're talking about rigorous, high-quality data and really solid forward-looking plans for how you're going to handle the climate transition. And hey, don't let the EU part fool you. If your business is part of any global supply chain, trust me, these rules are going to affect you.
All right, so with all these new demands, how do companies actually measure their impact? Because, the old saying, you just can't manage what you don't measure. So let's open up the core measurement toolkit.
The absolute cornerstone of all this measurement is greenhouse gas accounting, or GHG accounting. The best way to think of it is like financial accounting, but for carbon. It's the standardized way to calculate a company's entire carbon footprint, and it's all governed by one global rulebook, the GHG protocol.
So the GHG protocol breaks emissions down into 3 scopes, which you can see right here. Scope 1 is the stuff you burn yourself, in your factories, in your company cars. Scope 2 is the electricity you buy. But Scope 3 is the real game changer. It covers your entire value chain, everything from your suppliers to your customers. And for most companies, this is where the huge majority of their footprint and their biggest risks and opportunities are hiding.
The basic math here is actually surprisingly simple. You just take your activity data, say how much fuel you used, and you multiply it by a standard emission factor. The answer you get is your carbon dioxide equivalent, or CO2e. And that's so important because it gives us a common language, a way to compare the warming impact of different gases, like methane, on an apples-to-apples basis with CO2.
Okay, so while GHG accounting gives us that big company-wide picture, our next tool, the Life Cycle Assessment, or LCA, lets us zoom way in. It looks at the entire environmental footprint of just one product or service, all the way from the raw materials used to make it, its cradle, to how it's finally thrown away, its grave.
The LCA process follows these 4 pretty clear steps. You start by defining your goal. Then comes the hard part, collecting all the inventory data. Next, you assess the impact. But the real magic, the real value, is in step 4, interpretation. This is where you pinpoint the hotspots, those specific points in a product's life where you can make a change and have the biggest positive impact.
Our final measurement tool is water footprinting. And this is so much more than just counting how many gallons of water you use. It assesses the full impact, which is a massive business risk, especially in water-scarce areas like the UAE and the GCC. It basically turns water from a simple utility bill into a strategic KPI.
So we have all this data, piles of it. But data on its own is useless without a plan, right? This is where we pivot from just measuring things to building a strategy, turning those numbers on a spreadsheet into real, tangible business value. Now, the leading strategic model out there is the circular economy. This is a total rethink of the old, traditional take, make, waste model. The goal here is to design waste and pollution out of the system from the very start. Let's make this really concrete. Imagine a company. We'll call them Gulf Beverage. They are facing a perfect storm. They're using a crazy 5 liters of water for every 1 liter of product, their wastewater is toxic, they do zero recycling, and the regulators are breathing down their necks. Their whole business model is basically broken.
So instead of just trying to be a little bit less bad, they used circular thinking to redesign their entire system. And look at how they move up the value chain here. from basic recycling to actively reusing things, and most importantly, to preventing waste from even happening in the first place. They even found a way to recover energy from the little waste they had left. This big strategic shift then led to a super clear 12-month action plan. You can see the logic, right? They start with measurement, that water audit in the first quarter. Then they get to work, fixing leaks, starting recycling. By the end of the year, they're not only reusing their wastewater, but they're ready to publish their first ESG report. They've turned a huge risk into a story of innovation.
Okay, so you've measured your impact, you've built this brilliant circular strategy. The final piece of the puzzle is reporting. And this brings us right back to where we started, those mandatory disclosure rules.
The key concept you have to get your head around here is double materiality. It's a big requirement under the new EU rules. Basically, you have to report from two different perspectives. First, there's impact materiality. That's your company's impact on the world, looking from the inside out. Second, there's financial materiality. That's how ESG issues could affect your bottom line, looking from the outside in. And you have to do both.
Seriously, let this one sink in. ESG reporting is not a marketing exercise anymore. It is all about audited performance data. Every single number, every single claim has to be just as rigorous and verifiable as the numbers in your annual financial report. The whole era of greenwashing is literally being audited out of existence.
And that really brings us to the final and most critical question for every single business leader out there. As ESG becomes this core, audited part of your business, you have to ask, is our strategy built on a solid foundation of hard evidence? Or is it still just, wishful aspiration? Because in this new era, only one of those is going to stand up to scrutiny.